This cost me $847 to build. She destroyed it because my grass was half an inch too tall. But what this psycho HOA president didn't know, it wasn't actually a mailbox. Brenda Thornfield had been systematically destroying my property for 6 months, escalating from baseball bats to sledgehammers while my kids' birthday cards scattered in the mud, and every single attack was recorded on camera with forensic precision. This wasn't about community standards. This was suburban terrorism funded by a $340,000 embezzlement scheme that had been bleeding our neighborhood dry for 8 years. What she thought was her final victory lap was actually the evidence that federal prosecutors had been waiting for to build their case. My mailbox didn't just catch a vandal, it exposed a criminal enterprise that would send her to federal prison and liberate an entire community from years of HOA tyranny. Drop a comment about your worst HOA nightmares, because you're about to witness the most satisfying suburban takedown in legal history. My name's Marcus Steele, and 6 months ago I thought my biggest problem was my messy divorce. I'm a 45-year-old electrician who inherited my Aunt Betty's house in Willowbrook Estates, one of those 400K neighborhoods where every lawn looks like it's trimmed with nail scissors and the HOA has more rules than the federal tax code. The smell of sawdust and WD-40 from my new garage workshop was the only thing that felt like home during those first lonely weeks, especially with my 2 teenage kids only visiting every other weekend. That's when I met Brenda Thornfield, and suddenly my ex-wife seemed like a reasonable human being. Picture a 52-year-old woman in scratchy polyester blazers driving a white BMW with HOA 1 vanity plates, who's managed to stay HOA president for 8 consecutive years. Nobody volunteers for that job that long unless they're getting something out of it, and I was about to discover exactly what that something was. My first violation notice arrived 3 days after moving in. My standard black metal mailbox was apparently non-compliant materials. The letter looked like it was designed by someone who discovered Microsoft Word's font menu and decided to use every single option. I had 7 days to replace it with one from the HOA's preferred vendor, which charged $350 for what Home Depot sells for $89. Coincidentally, this vendor was owned by Brenda's brother-in-law, because of course it was. When Brenda showed up to discuss compliance, her overwhelming perfume hit me like a chemical weapon before I even fully opened the door. Standing there with her clipboard, tapping her pen like a metronome, she explained how community standards benefit everyone's property values, while her eyes cataloged every potential violation in my driveway. Being a reasonable guy trying to start fresh, I paid the $350. Mistake number 1. Within a week, Brenda's daily patrol routes began. Every morning at 7:15, the sound of her BMW engine became like fingernails on a chalkboard as she'd cruise past my house, slowing down to inspect for violations. Other neighbors whispered warnings when she wasn't around. Just keep your head down. Don't give her any reason. It's easier to comply than fight. My neighbor, Eleanor Vasquez, a retired teacher with kind eyes and a nervous laugh, quietly mentioned how Brenda had systematically driven out 3 families in the past 2 years. All happened to be divorced guys who dared to push back. The pattern became crystal clear fast. Single men got the most violations, anyone who questioned a fine got extra scrutiny, and Brenda's enforcement was more selective than a country club membership committee. Garbage cans 6 inches from the regulation spot earned a $75 fine, while her friend's landscaping truck could park wherever it wanted. Christmas lights staying up one day past December 31st cost $125, but the board members' Halloween decorations somehow stayed seasonally appropriate until Valentine's Day. But the grass incident, that's when this suburban power play turned into something much darker. I cut my lawn to 2.5 inches, which violated the maximum 2 inches regulation by exactly half an inch. We're talking about grass you'd need a ruler to measure properly, the kind of obsessive detail that only matters to someone drunk on petty authority. What happened next wasn't about community standards or property values, it was about breaking anyone who didn't immediately bow down to Queen Brenda's suburban kingdom. Because when my kids' birthday cards and Christmas packages started getting destroyed along with my mailboxes, I realized this wasn't just harassment, this was war. And Brenda had no idea she'd just picked a fight with someone who understood electrical systems, surveillance equipment, and exactly how to document evidence for criminal prosecution. The grass war started on a Tuesday morning when Brenda showed up at my door with a measuring tape, 2 HOA board members as witnesses, and the kind of smile that makes you check your pockets for your wallet. "Mr. Steele," she announced, clipboard in hand like a weapon, "your lawn is in violation of community standards." She knelt down dramatically, pressing her tape measure into my perfectly green grass like she was collecting evidence at a crime scene. 2.5 inches. My grass was 2.5 inches tall, violating the sacred maximum 2 inches rule by exactly half an inch. You have 48 hours to correct this violation, plus a $75 fine for non-compliance, she said, handing me a pre-printed citation that looked more official than most parking tickets. Now here's where being an electrician who actually reads instruction manuals saved my ass. That night, I dove into the 47-page HOA covenant like it was a circuit diagram, and buried in section 12.4.7 was a beautiful little clause stating that grass measurements must be taken no sooner than 72 hours after cutting to account for natural growth patterns. I had time-stamped photos of cutting my lawn just 36 hours before Brenda's surprise inspection. My contractor training had taught me something most homeowners never learn. HOA fines must follow due process, and boards can't just make up enforcement rules on the spot. The appeals process exists for exactly this kind of power trip nonsense. I cut my grass shorter the next morning, then marched over to Brenda's house with my evidence folder. The look on her face when I explained the 72-hour rule was like watching someone realize they'd been playing poker with their cards face up. "This fine is invalid," I told her, "and I want a written apology for the harassment." Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of rage creeping up her neck as she realized I'd actually read the rules she was supposed to enforce. That's when I knew this suburban dictator had never dealt with someone who fought back with actual facts. 3 days later, my mailbox looked like it had been hit by a meteor. The pristine $350 HOA-approved mailbox was dented beyond recognition, clearly struck multiple times with something heavy and metallic. My security camera caught Brenda's distinctive white BMW driving by at 2:17 a.m., but the angle didn't capture the actual vandalism. When I filed a police report, Officer Martinez looked at the footage and shrugged. "Could have been anyone with a baseball bat, sir." No clear evidence of who actually hit it. The smell of fresh coffee turned bitter in my mouth as I realized this woman was willing to commit actual crimes to maintain her power. But here's what Brenda didn't know about electricians. We're obsessed with documentation and redundant systems. That same day, I installed a professional 6-camera security system with motion-activated floodlights, night vision, and automatic cloud backup. Every angle of my property was now under surveillance, and every file automatically uploaded to 3 different servers. My years troubleshooting electrical problems had taught me that paper trails defeat petty tyrants because courts require evidence, not emotions. And the difference between he said, she said, and criminal conviction is documentation with photos, timestamps, and witnesses. My neighbor Eleanor watched me install the cameras from her kitchen window, then appeared at my fence with homemade cookies and nervous energy. "She's done this before," Eleanor whispered, glancing around like Brenda might be hiding in the bushes. 3 families moved away rather than fight her. Tom Garrison down the street, he's a veteran, 20 years military. She drove him to therapy with her constant harassment. The taste of Eleanor's snickerdoodles couldn't mask the bitter reality that this neighborhood lived in fear of one woman's petty tyranny. A week later, while researching HOA recall procedures, I discovered the real genius of Brenda's system. She'd been systematically targeting anyone who might challenge her authority: divorced men, minorities, anyone who questioned board decisions. The 3 families Eleanor mentioned had all been pressured to sell through escalating fines and mysterious property damage. Brenda wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president, she was running a protection racket in suburbia. The second mailbox destruction happened at 6:43 a.m. on a Saturday, captured in glorious 4K resolution from 4 different angles. This time Brenda brought a crowbar and didn't bother hiding her face, actually looking directly into one camera while swinging like she was starring in her own destruction derby. The footage was so clear I could read her lipstick brand, and the audio picked up her muttering, "That'll teach you to question my authority." Replacing the mailbox cost another $150 plus $200 in damaged packages that included my daughter's birthday present. But watching Brenda hand me a federal case on a silver platter was priceless because interfering with mail delivery isn't just property damage, it's a federal crime. 2 weeks later, Brenda discovered my work van parked in the driveway and her eyes lit up like a kid finding Christmas presents in July. The van had a small magnetic sign reading "Steel Electrical Services" that I'd honestly forgotten about, but to Brenda it might as well have been a neon billboard advertising my destruction. She appeared at my door the next morning with another pre-printed violation notice, this one citing the covenant's prohibition against commercial vehicles on residential property, complete with a $200 fine and threats of daily penalties until the violation ceased. The smugness radiating from her polyester blazer was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Here's where her selective enforcement became so obvious it bordered on comedy. I spent that afternoon documenting 12 other commercial vehicles parked throughout our neighborhood like some kind of suburban Where's Waldo game. Janet Morrison's real estate sedan sported magnetic door signs bigger than mine. Mike Patterson's landscaping trailer had lived permanently in his driveway so long it probably qualified for residency. And a plumber's truck on Elm Street had been there so long the neighbors were starting to feed it. But the real cherry on this hypocrisy Sunday was discovering Brenda's own house cleaning business van, complete with Thornfield Cleaning Services vinyl lettering that was visible from space, parked right in her own driveway. Years of dealing with building inspectors had taught me that discriminatory enforcement violates Fair Housing Act protections when it targets specific groups while ignoring identical violations by the inspector's friends. I filed a formal complaint with photographic evidence that would make a crime scene photographer proud, demanding equal treatment under the covenant terms. Brenda's response came not through official channels but through vandalism that made her previous work look like amateur hour. This time, she filled my replacement mailbox with quick-setting concrete before destroying it, creating a projectile that damaged the mail truck's bumper when the postal worker tried to open it. The $800 repair bill landed on my doorstep with a note from the postal supervisor that tasted like defeat. We can't risk our drivers or vehicles with your ongoing property disputes. But here's what happens when you mess with an electrician who hunts deer on weekends. I knew exactly how to set up night vision trail cameras that capture every detail of predatory behavior. The footage I collected that Thursday night was better than any nature documentary, showing Brenda's methodical planning as she brought tools, gloves, and even checked her watch to time her destruction perfectly. Watching her work with the focused intensity of a demolition expert, I realized those motion-activated cameras don't just record vandalism. They capture the premeditated, deliberate nature that transforms property damage into criminal conspiracy. My investigation into neighborhood history revealed Brenda had been running this racket for 3 years, targeting 6 other residents whose mailboxes mysteriously exploded after they challenged HOA decisions. Eleanor started her own documentation project, photographing violations that Brenda consistently ignored at properties owned by board members, while Tom began recording HOA meetings where proper procedures got trampled like grass under Brenda's BMW tires. The sound of whispered phone calls between neighbors created an underground resistance network that would make the French resistance proud. For my 4th mailbox, I decided to test Brenda's commitment by building a reinforced steel version that cost $400 and required an entire weekend of welding that filled my garage with the sharp scent of hot metal and determination. The military-grade construction was designed more for impact resistance than mail storage, but I wanted to see how far this suburban terrorist would escalate. Brenda's response exceeded my wildest expectations. She attacked with such sledgehammer fury that the recoil damaged her tool and injured her wrist, then immediately claimed I had booby-trapped the mailbox to cause harm, as if building something strong enough to withstand her attacks was somehow illegal. The scratches and dents on her abandoned hammer provided forensic evidence linking her to every previous attack like a criminal's calling card. A consultation with attorney David Kim revealed what I'd suspected from my contractor days dealing with liability issues. HOA board members aren't immune from personal liability when they commit intentional crimes, and discovery in a lawsuit could expose years of financial mismanagement. Small claims court caps at $5,000 but requires no attorney, making it perfect for cases where the evidence is overwhelming and the defendant has painted themselves into a legal corner. Brenda's next move proved she was either completely delusional about her legal exposure or desperate enough to risk everything on one final gambit. The county code enforcement inspection she triggered by filing false zoning complaints was supposed to be her nuclear option, but it backfired spectacularly when the inspector found violations at her own property that made mine look like a model citizen. Her home office violated the same zoning restrictions she'd accused me of breaking, and sometimes the best revenge is just handing your enemy enough rope and watching them hang themselves with enthusiastic precision. Brenda's desperation reached psychotic levels when she called county code enforcement claiming my garage workshop violated zoning laws, timing the complaint to destroy my weekend with Jake and Emma. Picture this. Saturday morning, I'm teaching my teenagers how to wire a light switch when some bureaucrat with a clipboard shows up treating me like a meth lab operator. My kids stood in the driveway watching their dad get humiliated, and the taste of that shame was like battery acid burning my throat. But here's the twist that made everything worthwhile. The inspector found nothing wrong with my setup, then casually mentioned that Brenda's home office violated the exact same zoning codes she'd accused me of breaking, running an unlicensed cleaning business from residential property. I hit back where it hurt most, her wallet and reputation. Filing an ethics complaint against the entire HOA board, I demanded an independent audit that had been overdue for years. My electrical contracting background meant I knew HOA members have legal rights to inspect financial records within 30 days, and boards that stonewall are usually hiding theft. The audit revealed $47,000 in landscaping expenses flowing to companies owned by board members' relatives, creating a money laundering operation that would embarrass the mafia. Brenda went full nuclear on my personal life, spreading rumors that I was unstable and dangerous while claiming my security cameras were for spying on neighbors' children. The whispered conversations that died when I approached felt like needles under my skin. Then came the anonymous note slipped under my door. Sex offenders often install cameras to watch kids. My hands shook reading those words because I knew exactly what she was trying to destroy: my relationship with Jake and Emma. When police showed up for a welfare check questioning my fitness as a father, I realized this suburban terrorist was willing to sacrifice my children's happiness to protect her petty kingdom. Eleanor had been keeping her own files, and what she revealed was chilling. Brenda had systematically targeted every divorced man in the neighborhood over 3 years, using identical tactics: escalating harassment, property damage, then character assassination until they sold and fled. Previous victims had chosen escape over fighting back, giving Brenda a perfect record of suburban ethnic cleansing. Tom provided military surveillance expertise while we built a federal case with the methodical precision of planning D-Day. The fifth Mailbox massacre created a family crime syndicate when Brenda recruited her adult son as muscle. Our cameras captured their driveway strategy session like mob bosses planning a hit, discussing destruction techniques before using his truck to rip my mailbox from the ground with enough force to crack concrete. Watching this mother-son demolition team work with such practiced coordination, I realized we weren't documenting random vandalism anymore. We were recording organized crime, and conspiracy charges don't just multiply civil damages, they multiply prison sentences. The neighborhood Facebook page exploded as residents finally found courage to share their Brenda horror stories. Eleanor posted photos of violations Brenda ignored at her own property: peeling paint, overgrown shrubs, and a fence that hadn't been regulation height since dial-up internet. Tom shared his military experience with toxic leadership, while neighbors described living conditions that sounded like suburban prison camp. The sound of children asking, "Why does the mean lady keep breaking things?" provided emotional fuel that transformed individual grievances into community revolution. My deep dive into county records revealed Brenda's criminal history wasn't just local. She'd been forced out as HOA president in her previous neighborhood for embezzlement, with charges dropped due to insufficient evidence. The pattern was clear. She moved here after burning down her last kingdom, bringing the same tactics that had worked before. Public records don't lie, and this wasn't Brenda's first con game, but it was going to be her last. For my announced final mailbox, I launched psychological warfare through social media, posting detailed timelines about expensive materials and professional installation while building something completely different in my garage. The cold metal of surveillance equipment felt like justice forming under my hands as I constructed not a mailbox, but an evidence-gathering station designed to capture Brenda's inevitable attack with forensic precision. Sometimes the most beautiful trap is the one your enemy builds for themselves, and I was about to hand Brenda enough rope to hang herself in front of the entire neighborhood while news cameras rolled. The anticipation was electric as everything moved into position. Brenda thought she was planning her final victory over the troublemaker who dared question her authority. What she was actually doing was walking into the most perfectly orchestrated sting operation suburbia had ever seen. One that would expose years of criminal activity and transform her from neighborhood dictator to federal prisoner faster than you can say mail fraud. The financial records request hit Brenda's operation like a sledgehammer through glass, and what we discovered made my blood run cold with excitement. When Eleanor's forensic accountant nephew finally cracked open the HOA books, we weren't looking at petty corruption, we were staring at a criminal empire that would make organized crime families jealous. Over 5 years, Brenda had funneled $230,000 through shell companies back to her own family, with her brother-in-law's preferred vendor mailbox scam just the tip of an iceberg that included fake landscaping contracts, phantom consulting fees, and maintenance work that existed only on paper. The smell of fresh printer ink filled Eleanor's kitchen as we documented each fraudulent transaction, and I realized we weren't dealing with a neighborhood bully anymore. We were looking at federal embezzlement charges that could send Brenda to prison for decades. But the discovery that changed everything was buried in page 73 of the original developer's covenant, a clause so obscure that even Brenda's 8-year reign of terror had missed it. Section 15.7 required unobstructed emergency services access to all residential addresses, meaning any interference with mail delivery or address identification violated life safety provisions that superseded HOA authority entirely. My hands trembled as I read those words because I understood what they meant. Brenda's mailbox destruction wasn't just vandalism. It was federal obstruction of emergency services that voided her legal immunity and transformed property damage into potential manslaughter if someone died because paramedics couldn't find their house. Eleanor's sharp eyes caught what everyone else had missed while reviewing Brenda's tax documents. Our suburban dictator was claiming homestead exemptions on 2 properties while listing 3 different business addresses, creating a fraud pattern that violated state tax law and federal mail regulations simultaneously. The taste of justice was sweet on my tongue as I realized Brenda's web of lies was about to strangle her. Because tax fraud isn't a civil matter. It's a criminal case that prosecutors love because the evidence is mathematical and undeniable. The insurance revelation was Eleanor's masterpiece, drawing on her decades in the industry to deliver the killing blow. HOA liability insurance explicitly excludes coverage for criminal acts by board members, meaning every lawsuit, every damage claim, and every legal defense would come directly from Brenda's personal assets. But the real beauty was that insurance companies become very aggressive when they discover fraud, and they have resources that make federal prosecutors look underfunded. We weren't just looking at criminal charges anymore. We were watching Brenda's complete financial destruction unfold in real time. The community transformation was like watching a neighborhood wake up from a collective nightmare. 23 families signed recall petitions while neighbors who'd whispered in shadows for years started speaking openly about Brenda's crimes. Tom's military contacts ensured our evidence would be handled with forensic precision, while the sound of excited planning sessions in coffee shops felt like organizing a revolution against suburban tyranny. My meeting with the district attorney's office confirmed what I'd dared to hope. Their HOA fraud task force was hungry for a case that would make headlines and prove politicians were fighting corruption. The prosecutor's eyes lit up when I described our evidence package because cases involving organized theft, fraud, and property destruction patterns enabled RICO prosecution under federal organized crime statutes. Brenda thought she was dealing with one stubborn neighbor who'd eventually surrender like all the others. But what she was actually facing was a coordinated federal investigation that would destroy her criminal organization and create legal precedent protecting future homeowners from similar abuse. The trap was set with surgical precision, our evidence was bulletproof, and all we needed was for Brenda to take one final swing at what she thought was just another mailbox. Eleanor's dining room transformed into a war room that would make Pentagon strategists jealous, with financial documents spread across her antique table like invasion plans, while the rich aroma of endless coffee fueled our late-night plotting sessions. The taste of impending victory was as intoxicating as Eleanor's Colombian blend as we assembled our dream team of suburban justice. David Kim, Eleanor's prosecutor-turned-defense attorney nephew, agreed to represent me pro bono because he could smell a career-making case from 50 miles away. His reputation for destroying corrupt officials was legendary, and watching him organize our evidence with surgical precision felt like having a legal hitman on speed dial. Tom's military police background elevated our amateur investigation into a professional operation that would make FBI agents weep with envy. The man could coordinate surveillance like he was planning D-Day, turning our neighborhood watch into a precision intelligence network that tracked Brenda's every move. Meanwhile, Eleanor's forensic accountant friend dove into HOA books with the enthusiasm of a treasure hunter, uncovering no-bid contracts to family members that violated every fiduciary duty law on the books. Self-dealing by board members doesn't just breach ethics, it creates personal liability for treble damages that would make Brenda's bankruptcy lawyer rich. The technical masterpiece I was building in my garage wasn't actually a mailbox. It was an evidence-gathering station disguised as suburban compliance. Hidden cameras with night vision, audio recording equipment that could pick up whispered confessions, GPS tracking to place Brenda at crime scenes, and impact sensors that would timestamp every swing of her destructive tools. Years of installing security systems had taught me that technology doesn't lie or forget, and multi-layered evidence collection turns criminal acts into prosecutorial slam dunks. The satisfying click of each hidden camera felt like loading bullets into a legal weapon. Our media strategy developed with the precision of a presidential campaign when Tom contacted Sarah Martinez, an investigative reporter whose HOA corruption exposés had made her the bane of suburban dictators statewide. Media pressure forces prosecutors to act because politicians hate looking soft on crime during election cycles, and Sarah's excitement was infectious when we described our evidence package. She'd been hunting for a case this comprehensive for years, complete with video evidence, financial fraud, and a villain so perfectly hateable that viewers would demand justice. The community mobilization felt like watching a revolution unfold in real time, as 31 neighbors signed recall petitions, providing overwhelming support to remove Brenda's entire criminal board. Eleanor organized a victim support fund while documenting property damage patterns that revealed systematic targeting of vulnerable residents. The smell of fresh ink on legal documents mixed with the scent of suburban rebellion as neighbors who'd whispered in shadows for years finally found their voices. Law enforcement coordination required diplomatic finesse, but Tom's friendship with Deputy Sheriff Martinez ensured our evidence would receive professional handling rather than bureaucratic burial. The county prosecutor requested advance briefing about our criminal referral, while code enforcement agreed to investigate permit fraud that could multiply Brenda's legal troubles exponentially. Proactive cooperation with authorities demonstrates good faith that judges remember during sentencing hearings. The psychological warfare was pure artistry as I posted social media updates about expensive materials and final attempt at compliance while building something completely different in my garage. The decoy construction timeline was designed to trigger Brenda's destructive instincts because predators can't resist what appears to be easy prey. Anonymous neighborhood tips about my premium installation fed her ego while we positioned cameras to capture her inevitable attack from every conceivable angle. Legal documentation became an obsession as David Kim indexed every piece of evidence with chain of custody precision that would survive any defense challenge. Criminal prosecution requires evidence standards that make civil court look casual, and every video file, financial record, and witness statement needed authentication that would impress federal prosecutors. The beautiful irony was that Brenda's own systematic approach to neighborhood terrorism had created the perfect paper trail for her destruction. The final trap elements included insurance claim preparation, security company monitoring, and media scheduling that would transform Brenda's attack into a public relations nightmare. Multiple legal tracks create overwhelming pressure because fighting criminal charges, civil lawsuits, insurance fraud claims, and media exposure simultaneously requires resources that most suburban criminals lack. The exquisite symmetry was that Brenda's greatest weapons, her systematic approach and need for control, would become the evidence used to destroy her. Everything was positioned for the perfect storm that would transform 8 years of suburban terrorism into federal prosecution while creating legal precedent protecting future homeowners. The anticipation was electric as we realized we weren't just planning revenge, we were orchestrating justice with the precision of a Swiss watch and the devastating impact of a legal nuclear bomb. Brenda thought she was preparing for another easy victory over a troublesome neighbor, but what she was actually walking into was the most perfectly choreographed takedown in HOA history. Brenda's desperation reached pathetic new heights when she showed up at Eleanor's door with homemade cookies and a bribery offer so obvious it belonged in a bad crime drama. "I'm restructuring the board," Brenda announced with fake sweetness that tasted like artificial sugar, "and you'd make an excellent landscaping committee chair." The $5,000 annual stipend came with a promise to forget about Marcus's compliance issues if neighbors would just let this mailbox situation resolve naturally. What made this moment pure gold was Eleanor wearing the wire Tom had provided, capturing every word of attempted obstruction of justice while Brenda sipped tea and incriminated herself with each syrupy sentence. The smear campaign exploded into full character assassination as anonymous flyers blanketed the neighborhood claiming I was a dangerous sex offender with suspicious behavior around children. The crumpled papers felt like acid between my fingers as I read lies designed to destroy my relationship with Jake and Emma, while fake police reports alleged I was stalking families and using surveillance for perverted purposes. The sound of conversations dying when I entered grocery stores made my chest tight with rage, but every false accusation was being documented for prosecutors who hate witness intimidation almost as much as child endangerment lies. My silent preparation transformed into neighborhood theater as the decoy mailbox installation became must-see suburban entertainment. Every camera angle was tested while neighbors secretly watched our choreographed justice unfold, understanding their roles in what would become the most satisfying takedown in HOA history. The cold metal of recording equipment felt like weapons being loaded as backup systems activated across 3 properties, because equipment failure during the climactic moment would be unforgivable. Brenda's sabotage reached professional destruction when she filed false complaints trying to suspend my electrical license, alleging unsafe work practices, with technical details so wrong they proved she'd never seen the inside of an electrical panel. Her complaint described impossible wire configurations and safety violations that don't exist in any electrical code, demonstrating either complete ignorance or intentional fabrication. Filing false professional complaints isn't just harassment. It's criminal defamation that state boards take personally, and they have investigative resources that make local police look understaffed. The community siege intensified as threatening phone calls targeted Eleanor about backing the wrong horse, while anonymous newsletters attacked Tom's military service, claiming veterans were unstable and dangerous to children. The rough texture of threat notes became daily reminders that 3 families were considering surrender rather than continued warfare, because living under constant psychological assault exhausts even strong people. But each threat also provided evidence for federal prosecutors who view witness intimidation as a fast track to serious prison time. My kids deserved honesty about what was coming, so our final peaceful conversation covered standing up to bullies even when it costs everything. Jake and Emma understood their father wasn't just fighting about property rights. He was battling the kind of corruption that destroys communities and silences good people. The crisp morning air during that last calm moment felt precious, because everything was about to explode in ways that would make national headlines. Law enforcement coordination reached military precision as Deputy Martinez increased patrols during high-risk hours while prosecutors prepared expedited response protocols. Pattern evidence of escalating harassment transforms individual incidents into systematic persecution charges, and federal authorities were positioning resources for immediate deployment. The anticipation was electric as radio chatter between surveillance units confirmed everyone was in position for what Tom called the most important bust of his career. Technical perfection was achieved as synchronized surveillance equipment created an evidence-gathering network that would capture Brenda's attack from every conceivable angle. Remote monitoring from Tom's command center ensured no detail would be missed, while backup power systems eliminated any possibility of equipment failure. The satisfying activation of each device felt like preparing for the Super Bowl of suburban justice, because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about creating legal precedent that would protect future homeowners from similar terrorism. Brenda's fatal overconfidence was assuming pressure would break me like her previous victims, not realizing that harassment only strengthened my determination to expose her criminal empire. She recruited 3 accomplices for maximum impact destruction, planning what she privately called her final solution to the Marcus problem. Eleanor's wire captured conspiracy planning so detailed it read like a criminal instruction manual, because organized crime doesn't require sophistication. Sometimes it just needs polyester blazers and unchecked authority. The trap was set with surgical precision as social media posts about my expensive custom mailbox provided irresistible bait while neighborhood newsletters announced installation timelines. Every participant understood their role in choreographed justice that would transform 8 years of suburban terrorism into federal prosecution, and the only remaining question was whether Brenda would destroy herself spectacularly enough to satisfy prosecutors, media, and neighbors who'd suffered in silence for too long. Brenda went full psychopath with a false police report claiming I'd threatened her with violence, complete with witness statements describing an imaginary confrontation that allegedly happened while I was installing emergency lighting at a downtown hospital 50 miles away. Her performance was Oscar-worthy as she described how I'd cornered her at the mailbox, threatened "what happens to snitches," and displayed clear signs of mental breakdown. The metallic taste of pure rage filled my mouth until Officer Rodriguez casually pulled out his body cam footage, showing my work truck at the hospital during her claimed attack time, watching her elaborate fantasy crumble like wet cardboard in real time. But here's the mini twist that made my blood run cold. Brenda wasn't just lying about threats. She was setting up justification for what came next. That evening, Child Protective Services showed up questioning my fitness as a father based on her credible reports of dangerous behavior around minors. Sitting in my living room while some bureaucrat asked if I'd ever displayed inappropriate interest in neighborhood children nearly broke me, because attacking my relationship with Jake and Emma crossed a line that transformed this from property disputes into something deeply personal. The smell of the social worker's cheap perfume mixed with my own fear sweat as I realized Brenda was willing to destroy innocent children to protect her criminal empire. My final preparations took on desperate urgency as the decoy mailbox received its last surveillance upgrades while I prepared for the possibility that Brenda's lies might actually succeed. Multiple attorneys secured evidence copies because innocent people sometimes lose in corrupt systems, and I couldn't let 8 years of community terrorism continue if her false accusations somehow stuck. The weight of 47 families' hopes pressed down like concrete as I realized this wasn't just about my mailbox anymore. It was about whether suburban dictators could destroy lives without consequences. The conspiracy expanded when Brenda recruited her son Derek with promises of inheriting HOA control once the problem family was eliminated through legal destruction. Eleanor's wire captured their kitchen planning session where Derek asked, "What if this goes too far?" And Brenda replied with chilling certainty, "Sometimes you have to destroy people completely to send the right message." Conspiracy charges multiply penalties exponentially, but hearing someone casually discuss ruining children's lives transforms legal strategy into moral obligation that demands total victory. Community support became my lifeline as neighbors who'd suffered silently for years finally found courage to stand publicly against tyranny. Tom's military precision coordinated evidence preservation, while Eleanor's volunteer network ensured maximum witness availability. But the rough texture of hastily made support signs felt fragile against Brenda's systematic destruction machine. 3 families still considered fleeing rather than fighting, because living under constant legal and social assault exhausts even strong people who just want peaceful suburban lives. Law enforcement coordination reached federal levels as postal inspectors joined sheriff's surveillance, recognizing that mail interference bypasses local politics where corruption sometimes influences outcomes. The static of encrypted radio communications created an atmosphere where everyone understood this case would determine whether organized suburban terrorism could operate with impunity. Federal prosecutors were positioning resources for immediate action because politicians love high-visibility cases that prove they protect ordinary citizens from corrupt officials. The technical perfection was absolute as synchronized cameras throughout the attack zone prepared to capture evidence that would survive any legal challenge. Cloud storage uploaded instantly while backup power systems eliminated equipment failure possibilities, because sometimes justice depends on technology working flawlessly when everything else falls apart. The satisfying click of final activation switches felt like loading the last round into a weapon that would end 8 years of neighborhood terrorism forever. My emotional preparation involved accepting that everything was about to explode in ways that would change lives permanently, win or lose. The cold morning air during my last peaceful moment tasted like freedom I might never experience again, because challenging corrupt power always risks total destruction of the challenger. Attorney briefings covered avoiding self-incrimination during chaos, but mostly I thought about Jake and Emma, growing up in a world where bullies with badges could terrorize families without consequences. Brenda's final overreach revealed complete delusion as she planned to film my violent reaction for additional false charges, bringing her own recording equipment to document what she expected would be my complete breakdown. Her text to accomplices read like a villain's manifesto. Time to finish this troublemaker permanently and show everyone what happens to people who challenge authority. The exquisite irony was that Brenda's systematic approach to destruction had created perfect documentation of her own criminal enterprise, turning her greatest weapons against herself with surgical precision. The trap was set with mathematical certainty, as social media posts about my final expensive mailbox triggered her destructive obsessions one last time. Every participant understood their role in choreographed justice that would transform suburban terrorism into federal prosecution. And the only question remaining was whether Brenda would destroy herself spectacularly enough to satisfy prosecutors hungry for career-making cases. Saturday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes before life-changing moments, and Eleanor's mailbox safety discussion at 9 a.m. drew 23 neighbors to the playground with perfect sight lines to my driveway. The sound of children laughing on swings created surreal normalcy, while adults positioned themselves like audience members waiting for the most important show of their lives. I stood near my front door, playing the role of unsuspecting homeowner while every camera angle was locked and loaded for the performance that would end Brenda Thornfield's reign of suburban terror forever. Brenda arrived like a one-woman demolition crew, her white BMW screeching into my driveway, followed by Derek's pickup truck loaded with sledgehammers, crowbars, and enough destructive equipment to level a small building. "This ends today!" she screamed loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear, her voice cracking with 8 years of unchecked fury. "No more coddling property value destroyers who think they're above community standards." The first swing of her sledgehammer against my decoy mailbox rang out like a church bell announcing Judgment Day, recorded from 7 different angles in glorious 4K resolution that would make federal prosecutors weep with joy. But here's where everything got beautiful. The hidden cameras captured not just destruction, but the conspiracy planning conversation between mother and son as they worked. "Remember what we practiced," Brenda panted between hammer blows. Document his violent reaction when he comes out screaming. Derek's nervous response was pure gold. Mom, what if he calls the cops again? Her reply sealed their fate forever. I've destroyed 6 other mailboxes and nothing happened because I am the authority here. The satisfying thunk of metal against reinforced polymer housing created a rhythm that sounded like justice keeping time. Deputy Sheriff Martinez emerged from his unmarked car during the third swing, his badge glinting in morning sunlight as he approached the crime in progress. Ma'am, drop the hammer and step away from the mailbox, he commanded with the calm authority of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. Federal Postal Inspector Williams appeared simultaneously, documenting mail interference that would add federal charges to what was already shaping up as the most comprehensive suburban crime prosecution in county history. The metallic click of handcuffs closing around Brenda's wrists created the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. The community witnesses provided a symphony of justice as 23 neighbors simultaneously gave statements, while Eleanor's wire recording played back Brenda's bribery attempts for arresting officers. Tom's military bearing lent credibility that made defense attorney challenges impossible, while children asked innocent questions like, why was the mean lady trying to break Mr. Marcus's mailbox? That would devastate any jury. Multiple witnesses prevent he-said-she-said dismissals while creating overwhelming evidence that prosecutors dream about during boring plea bargain negotiations. Sarah Martinez's news crew arrived with timing so perfect it seemed scripted, capturing Brenda's complete meltdown as she screamed about entrapment while being read Miranda rights. He tricked me. This is all a setup, she shrieked, her carefully maintained suburban facade cracking like cheap paint in summer heat. The irony was exquisite. After 8 years of systematic terrorism, she was complaining about someone fighting back with actual intelligence and planning. Social media live streams captured her breakdown in real time while Derek immediately flipped on his mother, telling officers, "She made me do it. I just wanted it to stop." The revelation moment was pure theater as I opened the hidden compartment in my decoy mailbox, revealing surveillance equipment that had documented every threat, every conspiracy conversation, and every criminal act. Every swing was recorded, every threat was documented, and every crime has been preserved for federal prosecution, I announced to cameras, while Brenda's face went through stages of grief in fast forward. The audible gasps from assembled neighbors mixed with children's excited questions about hidden cameras like in spy movies. The charges announced by prosecutor Jennifer Walsh were music to 8 years of terrorized ears: criminal property destruction, conspiracy to commit property destruction, mail interference, witness intimidation, filing false police reports, and obstruction of justice. This case represents systematic HOA fraud that's been stealing from taxpayers while terrorizing law-abiding citizens, she declared for rolling cameras. RICO charges were possible due to organized criminal enterprise patterns, while federal mail interference carried serious prison time that bypasses local political influence. The spontaneous applause from gathered neighbors echoed off suburban houses like thunder, while Eleanor announced the HOA board recall election would proceed immediately with new leadership committed to actual community service. Tom saluted me with military precision as Derek begged officers to, "Please don't let my mom drag me down with her." The taste of victory was sweeter than anything I'd ever experienced, because this wasn't just personal revenge, it was justice for an entire community that had suffered in silence for too long. But the most beautiful moment was Prosecutor Walsh's closing statement. This prosecution will send a message that HOA corruption ends here, and citizens have the right to fight back against suburban terrorism. The immediate aftermath tasted sweeter than Eleanor's victory cookies as Brenda got booked on 12 felony charges with $50,000 bond, while her accomplices flipped faster than pancakes at a church breakfast. Derek's cooperation agreement provided devastating testimony against his mother because blood loyalty evaporates when facing federal prison time. The viral news story, HOA Karen's mailbox revenge destroys her life, exploded across social media, transforming our suburban nightmare into a nationwide symbol of citizens fighting back against petty tyrants drunk on homeowner association power. Justice arrived with mathematical precision as Brenda pleaded guilty to avoid RICO prosecution, earning 18 months in federal prison plus $67,000 restitution to victims whose lives she'd terrorized for sport. Criminal conviction enabled our civil lawsuit for treble damages while her insurance company sued for fraud, reducing the suburban dictator who'd once controlled our entire neighborhood to bankruptcy and orange jumpsuits. The beautiful irony was watching someone who destroyed others' property lose everything she'd stolen through years of systematic corruption. Community healing began the moment Eleanor won unanimous election as HOA president, eliminating 43 ridiculous rules while promising transparency instead of personal enrichment schemes. The sound of genuine children's laughter returned to our streets for the first time in years, while Tom's appointment as review chairman transformed architectural enforcement from harassment tool into actual community service. Property values increased because fairness and sanity improved neighborhoods more than fear and intimidation ever could. My personal transformation extended beyond vindication as Jake and Emma gained new respect for their father's principled courage, understanding that sometimes standing up to bullies requires risking everything. My electrical business exploded with referrals from grateful neighbors who finally felt safe in their own community, while firm handshakes replaced the nervous avoidance that had characterized my early months here. Installing my new actual mailbox became a block party celebration, with the postal supervisor personally thanking me for making our job safer and easier. The ripple effects reached far beyond our neighborhood as prosecutors created HOA fraud task forces investigating corruption across multiple counties. The Thornfield Act passed state legislature requiring due process for violations while limiting enforcement powers that had been abused for decades. Individual courage sparked systemic reform, because sometimes one person's refusal to surrender inspires changes that protect thousands of future homeowners from similar suburban terrorism. Brenda's restitution money funded the Stand Up to Bullies scholarship for students who demonstrate courage against institutional harassment, while annual Justice Day celebrations raise funds for legal aid helping other HOA victims. The scholarship ceremonies fill me with pride as young people learn that positive change emerges from negative experiences when communities choose courage over convenient silence. Eleanor's granddaughter was our first recipient, planning to study law and fight corruption professionally. My unexpected platform grew to over 100,000 followers as the Suburban Justice documentary featured our case nationwide, inspiring homeowners across America to document abuse and fight back against corrupt boards. Consulting requests flood in from families facing similar harassment, proving that sharing personal stories motivates others to seek justice rather than accept defeat. The knowledge gained from fighting corruption became a calling, helping ordinary citizens navigate legal systems designed to intimidate rather than serve. The transformation was complete as neighboring HOAs voluntarily reformed policies to avoid investigations, while real estate agents market resident-friendly communities as premium selling points. Our case established legal precedent cited in dozens of subsequent lawsuits, protecting homeowners from arbitrary enforcement and financial exploitation that had operated unchecked for decades. Standing up to one suburban bully inspired systematic changes benefiting millions of Americans trapped in similar situations. Personal happiness bloomed as community acceptance replaced years of hostile surveillance, while my relationship with investigative reporter Sarah Martinez grew from professional cooperation into genuine romance built on shared values of truth and justice. Family dinners lost their underlying tension as the warm satisfaction of belonging replaced the metallic taste of constant conflict. The final lesson transcends property disputes. Documentation defeats intimidation. Community solidarity multiplies individual courage, and bullies fold like cheap lawn furniture when faced with organized resistance. Corruption unchallenged spreads like poison, but citizens willing to fight back can transform entire systems designed to serve officials rather than communities. Drop a comment sharing your worst HOA nightmare and subscribe to HOA Stories for more tales of ordinary citizens defeating extraordinary corruption. Next week, how I used city ordinances to shut down my neighbor's all-night party house that was destroying our peaceful community one bass drop at a time.
Thanks for watching HOA Stories. If this episode made you laugh or shake your head at HOA madness, hit that like button and drop your opinion below. We post HOA Karen Chaos and Neighborhood Showdowns every week, so be sure to subscribe to catch the next unbelievable story.